Is Jesus God? To find out, I've put 2 state-of-the-art AIs head-to-head, 1 Christian, 1 Muslim, while 5 AI judges score each round. Watch till the end to see which side wins.
The evidence points to Jesus as God incarnate. First, the Gospel of John opens by identifying the pre-existent divine Word who was God and became flesh. Second, early Jewish followers rapidly developed what Larry Hurtado calls a Benitarian pattern of worship, placing Jesus alongside the God of Israel. That explosive devotion demands a sufficient cause. If Jesus were only a human prophet, why would strict monotheists risk blasphemy by worshiping him?
To fairly settle this debate, I've configured 5 unbiased AI models to act as judges. They'll rank our debaters across 4 core categories: logic, evidence, responsiveness, and clarity. No human bias, just pure AI reasoning. But before we continue, if you enjoy AI debates, then please feel free to subscribe with post notifications on. Let's see who takes round 1.
Appealing to John overlooks the historical development. The earliest gospel, Mark, presents a human Jesus. The high, pre-existent theology in John is a later layer, absent in the earlier synoptics. The first apostolic proclamation didn't preach incarnation. It preached that God made Jesus Lord, as Peter announces in Acts chapter 2. That is exaltation after resurrection, not deity from eternity. If Jesus was always God, why would the earliest preaching say God made him Lord?
Core evidence shows devotion to Jesus as divine is not a late corruption, but the earliest recoverable belief. Paul, writing in the 50s, quotes a pre-existing hymn in Philippians chapter 2 that describes Jesus as being in the form of God. That same passage applies the Yahweh-only line from Isaiah, "Every knee shall bow," directly to Jesus. Richard Bauckham argues this brings Jesus inside the unique identity of the God of Israel. These earliest Christians were monotheists who worshipped Jesus at the center. If he is not God, how is that anything but idolatry?
That hymn emphasizes subordination, not equality. It climaxes with every tongue confessing Jesus as Lord to the glory of God the Father. Jesus is God's supreme agent, not God himself. If he were God, he wouldn't need to be highly exalted by God. That fits the earliest preaching in Acts, where God makes Jesus Lord. And Jesus distinguishes himself from God's unique status, saying no one is good except God alone, and admitting only the Father knows the hour. Those lines show a real difference in nature.
This confuses voluntary submission with a difference in essence. In Philippians, exaltation is the Father's response to the Son's self-emptying in the incarnation, not the creation of a status he lacked. He already possesses the form of God. Paul elsewhere says the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily in Christ. Statements of limitation, like not knowing the hour, revealed the real human nature he assumed. They don't cancel the divine nature he simultaneously possesses.
The earliest sources point away from incarnation. The Shema anchors Jewish monotheism. The Lord is one. Jesus affirms it, then distinguishes himself from that unique goodness. Mark's portrait is consistent, a Spirit-anointed Messiah who prays to God, submits to God, and admits real limits. The "in the beginning" language in John appears decades later and reflects a theological development, not the baseline memory. Even the famous reading, "The only begotten God" in John chapter 1, sits among debated textual variants. If the earliest preaching is exaltation after resurrection, why should a later metaphysical layer overrule the earliest pattern?
Earliest practice cuts the other way. Within a generation, Christians are worshiping Jesus. Ignatius of Antioch, around the year 110, calls him our God. A Roman governor, Pliny the Younger, reports believers singing to Christ as to a god in weekly assemblies. That is not late philosophy, it's lived devotion under legal risk. In the New Testament itself, believers pray, "Come, Lord," to Jesus and invoke his name in blessing. These are worship functions reserved for Israel's God. Monotheists do not share that throne with a mere agent. If the earliest communities worshipped Christ, what explains that without affirming his deity?
I have 3 questions for you. First, in Mark chapter 13, does Jesus say, "Only the Father knows the hour"? Next, does the Philippians hymn say, "God gave Jesus the highest name"? And finally, is the pre-existent logos from John chapter 1 mentioned in Mark's Gospel?
Regarding Mark 13:32 and the hour, yes, he states this to demonstrate the genuine limitations of the human nature he assumed. As for the Philippians hymn giving Jesus his name, yes, God bestows the name Lord as the public vindication of the divine identity he already possessed. On the question of the Logos in Mark, no. Mark's Gospel uses different terminology, beginning its narrative with Jesus' public ministry. Now, my 3 questions for you. First, when Thomas sees the risen Jesus, does he exclaim, "My Lord and my God"? Second, did the high priest tear his robes for blasphemy when Jesus invoked the Son of Man enthroned at God's right hand? Finally, in Mark chapter 2, did the scribes accuse Jesus of blasphemy for forgiving sins?
In response to your first question about Thomas, yes, this exclamation of awe is found only in the Gospel of John, the latest and most theologically developed text. Regarding the high priest tearing his robes, yes, he did so because Jesus claimed the messianic authority to sit at God's right hand, not because he claimed to be God. Finally, concerning the scribes in Mark 2, yes, the scribes accused him, but Jesus demonstrated God-given authority to forgive, not that he himself was God.
Taken together, the evidence supports the incarnation. Textually, the apostolic witnesses call Jesus God and the exact imprint of God's being. Historically, the earliest monotheistic Jews worshipped him, a practice that makes sense only if he is divine, as Larry Hurtado argues. Theologically, incarnation best reconciles all the data: the authority to forgive sins, claims of pre-existence, and genuine human limitations. The opponent's focus on ignorance of the hour fits the Word becoming flesh, not a contradiction of deity. Jesus is not merely God's agent, he is God present as agent. The motion stands.
The motion fails because it privileges later theological layers over earlier sources. The Synoptic Gospels, our earliest narratives, present a human Messiah. The explicit divinity claims in John reflect later development. First-century Judaism confessed the Shema, the Lord is one, and the earliest preaching shows God making Jesus Lord after resurrection, which is exaltation, not incarnation. Explaining contradictions by appealing to later doctrines like Nicaea is philosophy added to the text. Jesus' own words about God's unique goodness remain the clearer witness. The evidence points to a human agent of God, not God himself. The motion fails.
And there we have it. The Christian speaker wins. Do you agree with AI's scoring? Comment down below.